In the heart of the French Revolution, the very idea of justice was turned on its head. Formal trials? Forget about them. In their place, something far more terrifying emerged: blood tribunals. For 5 horrifying days in September 1792, the citizens of Paris, gripped by a paranoid fever, decided to become their own judge, jury, and executioner. They stormed the city's prisons, not to free anyone, but to slaughter them. Armed with axes, pikes, and clubs, they hacked men, women, and even children to pieces in a methodical frenzy that would forever stain the ideals of the revolution. This is the story of how the fight for liberty spiraled into one of the most horrific massacres in European history, the September Massacres. So, how on earth did it come to this? To understand the madness, we have to rewind just a few weeks, to the end of a long, hot summer in Paris. It's late August 1792. The French Revolution is 3 years in, but now it feels like it's about to collapse. Just weeks before, on August 10th, the monarchy was overthrown, and King Louis XVI and his family were thrown in prison. This left a massive power vacuum, and into that void stepped the radical Paris Commune, a new city government hungry for revenge against anyone it considered an enemy. But the real terror was coming from outside the city. The armies of Austria and Prussia had invaded France, and they were closing in on Paris. The Prussian commander, the Duke of Brunswick, issued a manifesto, a threat so chilling it electrified the city with fear. He promised the complete destruction of Paris if any harm came to the royal family. And things were not going well for the French army. The fortress of Longwy had fallen with barely a fight, and the strategic city of Verdun was about to do the same. The road to Paris was wide open. Panic took over the capital, but the fear wasn't just of invaders at the gates, it was of the enemy within. A toxic rumor started to spread, whispered in taverns and shouted on the streets: the prison plot. The city's prisons were overflowing with thousands of suspected counter-revolutionaries, nobles, priests who wouldn't swear allegiance to the new government, and royalist sympathizers. The fear was that as soon as volunteer soldiers left to fight the Prussians, these prisoners would break out, butcher the women and children left behind, and hand a defenseless Paris over to the enemy. This wasn't just political disagreement anymore. It was a paranoid fantasy about to become an excuse for mass murder. In an atmosphere this charged with fear, all it takes is a few loud voices to turn panic into violence. And in Paris, those voices were impossible to ignore. The most prominent belonged to Jean-Paul Marat, from the pages of his radical newspaper, L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people. Marat acted as the revolution's high priest of paranoia. He didn't just report on the prison plot theory, he championed it. He openly called for the people to take justice into their own hands and slaughter the enemies of the revolution before they could strike first. His words were like gasoline on a smoldering fire. Then there was Georges Danton. As the new Minister of Justice, Danton was one of the most powerful men in France. His role in the massacres is still debated by historians, but his actions definitely helped set the stage. Facing the Prussian advance, Danton gave a series of thunderous speeches. In one, he roared to the assembly, "To conquer them, we must dare, dare again, always dare, and France is saved." For many, this was a rousing call to defend the nation. For others, it sounded like a green light for direct, violent action. More concretely, Danton ordered citywide house-to-house searches for weapons and suspects. This move caused the prison population to swell by thousands, packing the jails with the very people the public was being told were about to destroy them. The new Paris Commune, which held the real power in the city, did nothing to stop the rising hysteria. In fact, some of its most radical members actively encouraged it. They saw the prisoners not as citizens awaiting trial, but as an existential threat to be eliminated. The stage was set. The prisons were full, the people were terrified, and the leaders were either calling for blood or looking the other way. The spark finally hit the powder keg on Sunday, September 2nd, 1792. It didn't start with a grand plan, but with a sudden, brutal attack. A convoy of about 24 priests who had refused to swear a loyalty oath to the revolutionary government was being transferred to the Abbaye prison. As their carriages moved through the tense streets, a mob formed. Screaming insults and accusations of treason, they surrounded the transports. The guards were either unable or unwilling to stop what happened next. The mob dragged the helpless priests from the carts and fell upon them. With makeshift weapons, pikes, clubs, and swords, they butchered them right there in the street. This first massacre was the point of no return. It was as if a dam of restraint had burst. The sight and smell of blood didn't horrify the crowd, it emboldened them. News of the killings spread like wildfire across Paris. The mob, now believing it was carrying out the people's will, turned its attention to the Abbaye prison itself. They didn't go home. They moved with a new, terrifying purpose. The killing of the priests wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The wave of violence that had just been unleashed would now crash against the walls of every prison in Paris. You might imagine what followed was pure random chaos. But what happened next was something far more chilling. It was an organized slaughter. At the Abbaye prison, the mob established a pattern that would be repeated across the city. They formed what became known as a popular tribunal, a makeshift court with zero legal authority. A revolutionary figure named Stanislas Maillard set himself up as a self-appointed judge. Prisoners were dragged from their cells one by one to face this court. They were told why they'd been arrested and asked a few quick questions. There was no defense, no evidence, no real trial. A swift judgment was passed. If the judge acquitted the prisoner, the crowd might cheer, and the person would be escorted out, usually in a state of shock. But if the verdict was death, often given with a chilling phrase like, "Transfer him to La Force," or simply, "Let him go," the prisoner was shoved out into the prison courtyard. There, a gauntlet of killers waited. Known as the September Massacres, a core group of perhaps only 150 active participants carried out the executions with brutal, personal efficiency. They used axes, meat hooks, sabers, and pikes. The killing was methodical, exhausting work. Eyewitnesses described killers with wrists swollen from the sheer repetitive motion of their gruesome labor. The rest of Paris either locked its doors in fear or watched with a sense of grim approval. From the Abbaye, the frenzy spread. At the Carmelite convent, around 115 priests and bishops held there were systematically murdered in the garden. The massacres erupted at other prisons, the Conciergerie, La Force, and the Bicêtre. But the horror may have reached its peak at the Salpêtrière. This wasn't a prison for political enemies. It was a women's prison and a house of correction, holding prostitutes, petty criminals, and even orphaned girls. The mob showed no mercy. Around 35 women and girls were dragged from their cells and slaughtered, their only crime being that they were prisoners. Perhaps the most infamous victim was Marie-Thérèse, the Princesse de Lamballe, a close friend of Queen Marie Antoinette. Imprisoned at La Force, she was brought before a tribunal and ordered to swear an oath to liberty and equality, and another of hatred to the king and queen. She agreed to the first, but refused the second. For that loyalty, she was condemned. Pushed into the street, she was set upon by the mob. She was struck on the head with a pike, then hacked to death. Her body was mutilated, her head severed and stuck on a pike, and then paraded through the streets. The mob even marched to the temple prison where the royal family was held and tried to force the queen to look upon the gruesome head of her murdered friend. By the time the killing finally stopped on September 6th, between 1,100 and 1,400 people were dead. That was nearly half the entire prison population of Paris. And the most chilling fact of all, the vast majority weren't aristocrats or priests. Historians estimate that political prisoners made up less than a quarter of those killed. Over 70% of the victims were ordinary criminals, forgers, and people jailed for debt. Men and women with no connection to the counter-revolution, murdered by a paranoid mob that saw enemies in every shadow. The French Revolution is full of these dark and complex stories, moments where the highest ideals crashed into the most brutal realities. If you want to continue exploring this chaotic and fascinating period of history, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. The September Massacres sent a shockwave across France and Europe. The killings were immediately politicized. Moderate factions in the government, the Girondins, were horrified and blamed radicals like Marat and Danton. But the hardline Jacobins and their supporters either defended the violence as a regrettable but necessary act of popular justice or celebrated it as a revolutionary victory. The massacres were more than just a bloody spasm of violence. They set a terrible precedent. They legitimized terror as a political tool. The makeshift blood tribunals of the mob were a dark rehearsal for the official, state-sanctioned violence that was to come. Just a year later, the formal reign of terror would begin, complete with the revolutionary tribunal that sent tens of thousands to the guillotine. But it was here, in the blood-soaked prisons of September 1792, that the revolution first showed its capacity for unbridled slaughter. The 5 days of the massacres remain a terrifying testament to how a movement born from the pursuit of liberty could, when gripped by fear and paranoia, descend into a spectacle of methodical, pitiless carnage.